Hi everyone, Mr. Hamilton here. Today I'm going to show you a very exciting project. I'm going to show you how to make Bentwood rings. So these are rings made of wood, bent into a coil, and finished on the lathe. So basically, we're going to take veneers, which are very thin strips of wood. This one here is about a 1/64 of an inch thick. We're going to cut it into strips, use heat bending, and then bend it into a coil, and then glue that coil, and then move it to the lathe, sand it all down, and put a finish on it, and then you have a nice, beautiful ring. So the very first step before we get started is just to kind of determine the size of ring you want. So we have a ring sizer here. You just put your finger in, select the size of the ring you want. I'm going to make a little pinky ring. Once you've selected the size of your ring, you need to find a cylinder that is that same size. So I have a socket here. Sockets work really well. It's the same size as the ring size that I've selected. So I'm going to use this socket for all the coiling of the wood. So I've selected the size of my the inside diameter of my ring. Now I need to select what kind of wood I'm going to use. I'm going to use this black walnut. We have a lot of species to choose from, but this black walnut makes really nice rings and bends really nicely. Okay, so now that I've selected the size that I'm going to want the inside of my ring to be, and I've selected the wood I'm going to use, I need to cut this wood now into strips. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to inspect the wood, make sure that there's no big defects, no knots. I'm going to make sure that it's relatively straight grain. And to cut the strip, I'm going to use an X-Acto knife. A framing square is a straight edge. And I put this board down on the table so that we don't damage the table with the knife. Okay, so for the width of the strip I'm going to cut, I want it to be wider than my finished ring's width, because we're going to end up sanding down the sides a little bit. So I'm just putting my straight edge on top, holding it down, okay, here's my strip of wood. So I'm just about ready to bend it. I have to do one more important step. And that is, I need to make the ends of these strips nice and sharp. I need to make them come to a taper. I'm going to use sandpaper, and I'm just going to rub the end of the strip on sandpaper to make it nice and sharp. Okay, now that I've sanded it to a nice sharp taper on both sides, I can get started with the bending. Okay, now that I have my strip of wood cut, my strip of veneer, and I have the ends tapered, and I've selected the size for the inside of my ring, now I'm going to put this strip in hot water to soften it up. I'm going to put it in the water for anywhere from 30 seconds to 3 minutes, depending on the species. Okay, now I'm going to wrap it, the veneer around this socket into a nice, neat coil. I want to make sure my coil is nice and tight. I also want to make sure that I'm wrapping straight. Oh yeah, okay. If you have a little bit of wood splintering out the sides, that's okay, because we're going to sand off the sides. Once I have it all wrapped up there, put it on the tape. This is painter's tape. And then we want to slide that off of our cylinder. Okay, once we have this coil made, we need to let it dry for about 24 hours before we apply the glue. So this part can be quite tricky, and I recommend working with a partner. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to uncoil this veneer that I bent yesterday, so it's nice and dry. Careful taking the tape off, you don't want to damage the veneer. And then I'm just going to uncoil it like a cassette tape, kind of. Okay. Now, I'm going to use thick CA glue for gluing up this ring, and I'm also going to do it on a surface where the glue is less likely to stick to. So I have a board here that has packing tape applied to it, and I have my socket from before. So I'm now going to wrap this ring around the socket, adding little bits of thick CA glue as I coil. So this can be a tricky process, and it takes a bit of practice. Okay, make sure that the coil is nice and tight. Now you only want to use small amounts of CA glue because you don't want your ring to stick to the socket or your fingers. Once you get to the end of the coil, you need to hold it. This glue sets relatively fast, so you don't need to hold it for very long, maybe about 10 seconds. Now, I want to take the socket, slip it out of the ring blank, make sure that it's all held there. And now I'm going to use some thin CA glue to fill any gaps that I might have had in my glue up. So this thin CA glue will flow into the wood, any of the little gaps, and it'll fill them up so that you don't have any gaps when you're turning your ring. So I'm just going to use small drops. And just let this soak into the sides of the ring. Yeah, you don't want to use too much because you don't want to be making a mess of it. That looks pretty good. Now I'll do the other side. Okay, there we go. I have a ring blank. I'm going to now sand the sides of the ring flat. And I'm also going to sand until I get to my finished width that I would like. So to do so, I'm going to sand with this rough sandpaper flat on the table, applying even pressure to the ring so that I don't end up with a lopsided ring. Okay, this looks pretty good. So I've sanded both the sides flat and I've gotten down to my finished width. Now to get the ring set up on the lathe, I have to set up the ring chuck attachment. So I have this, goes into the headstock. This adapter goes into the tailstock. Put one bushing on there. Ring chuck next your ring. Other ring chuck. and then some bushings. And we tighten this up. Don't want to over tighten it. Okay, now to turn the ring down to size, I'm going to use these scraping tools. I'm going to use the round nose scraper first. Now that I've got the general shape of the ring, now I need to do the inside. So I'm going to take the ring off of the ring chuck. Now, so to finish the inside of the ring, I'm going to mount the ring in the 4-jaw chuck. Make sure it's in there nice and evenly. And then you don't have to clamp it down very hard. You don't want to damage the outside of the ring. Once I have it in there, now I'm just going to use sandpaper to finish the inside of the ring. So I'm going to start with a rough grit and work my way up to 320 grit. And I have the sandpaper rolled up in a roll because we never want to stick our fingers in the ring when it's turning on the lathe. Once the ring is nice and smooth inside, we can apply the finish. So for the finish, we're going to use the same thin CA glue that we used before. Make sure there's no dust on the ring. And just put a drop of CA glue on your finger, on a gloved finger, and wipe it on the inside of the lathe while just turning the lathe by hand. We're going to do 3 coats of CA glue with this same technique, giving it a light sand between coats.
I'm just going to give it a really light sand with 600 grit. Get rid of all the dust and apply another layer of CA glue. Okay. Give it a quick sand. And now I'm going to apply my final layer of CA glue. Okay.
So now the inside of the ring is all finished. Now I'm going to mount the ring back on the ring chuck to sand the outside of the ring. So we always want to remove the tool rest when we're sanding on the lathe. So I'm going to mount the ring back on the ring chuck. And I'm also going to turn down the speed. When we're sanding on the lathe, we don't want the ring to be moving very fast. Okay, I'm going to use the same sandpaper from before, working my way up to 320 grit. Okay, now the outside of the ring is all sanded. So to apply the CA glue to the outside of the ring, I've mounted a ring mandrel in the 4-jaw chuck. We're not going to spin this, but we're just going to use it to hold the ring, and we're going to turn the lathe by hand. So I'm going to slide the ring onto the ring mandrel. Make sure the ring mandrel is clean. I also have a piece of paper on the lathe here so that if I have any glue dropping off of the ring, it doesn't get onto the lathe. So now I'm going to do the same process as before. Put a drop of glue on my finger and then just wipe it onto the ring. And we want to be careful now that we don't end up sticking the ring to the ring mandrel. So you only want to apply like a little bit at a time. And we're also going to do 3 coats. Once this dries, I'm going to put it back on the ring chuck, give it a quick sand, and bring it back over here for another coat. Okay, so the final step in making the Bentwood ring is to apply the polish. So I'm going to put the ring back onto the ring chuck. And I've turned up the speed on the lathe. So I have this wax here. I'm just going to apply a thin layer of wax to the outside of the ring. Now I'm going to use some paper towel to rub on the ring while it's spinning to melt the wax into the ring.
I like to apply a couple layers of the wax. Get it nice and polished. You can see the color of the wax changing as it melts. Nice. The paper towel also gets quite hot when it's rubbing the wax because that's melting it into the ring.
Okay, so now I can just take the ring and I just need to wipe off the excess wax that's on the edge. Give the edges a little buffing. And there you go. Nice polished Bentwood ring. So this is a basic ring. You can also make inlays in the ring. You can make rings with multiple different species of wood. So have fun with it.